Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
I'm here today with one of our industry experts from International Leaders UK. Roman of Dr. Logic is our industry expert on IT. Roman, good to have you chatting to me this morning.
Yeah, thanks very much. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So Roman, a couple of things I wanted to have a chat about. And to me, one of the key things that you bring to the International Leaders community as an IT expert is really helping companies with how to get the business being more efficient using bits of tech. So looking at opportunities to make the business more efficient using technology. Is that something you're really passionate about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the real benefit of having computers is, if we look back over the last 100 years, is that they can do things that we can't do, or they can do things that we find quite mundane. Started with the likes of international business machines, IBM. And if you think back to banking, initially, you used to have calculators who were people. There were people called calculators, and their jobs were to calculate interest and keep the books right. And obviously, you wouldn't even dream of having people doing that now, paying people to do those kind of interest calculations, but that's how it used to be. And if you just think about the word IT, it's information technology. It's all about technology to make the handling of information better, whether it's mundane calculations, or to ensure that you have the right information at the right time to make the right decisions. But yeah,
when we talk about improvement, it's interesting actually just hearing what you just said, because there's improvement in you need to have less people around. Improvement in that people enjoy their work better because they're not doing the mundane tasks, and also you free up time to go and do other things, right? Or think more strategically, or to do more customer engagement, the things that really add value to your business. How do you help companies, or when you're approaching a company and trying to help them leverage IT, how do you define that improvement? What kind of things do you like to focus on when it comes to the improvement?
Well, the first thing is to focus on their business rather than IT. So what we want to avoid is actually talking about IT at all. And it's quite often the case with anyone. I think it's human nature. If you find a problem, you're going to try and fix it. And we're much more interested in hearing about the problems rather than people's idea of how they think of fixing it. Apart from the fact that we also want to know what they have done so far to fix it, because that's going to give us some relevant context. But in the initial phase, it's about understanding the business's needs. And so a business owner is going to know more about what's wrong with their business than we will. Now, in the same breath, what you'll find is that once they start talking about what they're trying to resolve or improve or make more efficient, or new markets, whatever they might be moving into, we can then use our experience that we've gained over the last 20 years to then make other suggestions, because inevitably there'll be things that they don't even realize they don't know about. And that's part of the value we bring. But mainly it's starting with a conversation about their business and what they're trying to do. So it may just be that they're misquoting on projects. They're not able to get enough of a handle on how expensive it is to do a piece of work. And that may mean just something as simple as introducing a way of counting how much time is spent on stuff, and then being able to relate that back to how much they estimated. And then what you may find as well is that certain employees have a different idea of how long things take sometimes, and it's a pretty consistent factor. So one person may well always spend 50% more time doing something than they thought they would, or some people may spend twice as much, or some people are quite aware of that and already put a factor in there. So it starts with talking to the business and understanding what the business is struggling with. That's our first step.
And just thinking about that, there's lots of companies at the moment I'm coming across that are struggling with recruitment or finding talent. Some of those are kind of the lower paid jobs, in hospitality or various other jobs where there's just a lack of people around or willing to do the jobs. And then there's also more experienced technical jobs as well. Do you see it quite exciting, the fact that we've got this problem of labour shortage and technology's got to be one of the solutions? Where do you see the biggest opportunities at the moment, the quick wins to kind of use tech and take away some of that pain of not being able to find people?
Well, I mean, there's two things. One, technology can be used to help with recruitment, but obviously, if you're using it in the right way, you can avoid having to recruit. I think using technology to remove the need for a whole employee, unless they're part of a larger team, is going to be quite difficult, especially if they've got a kind of fundamental role. But firstly, I think in terms of recruiting itself, the platforms that are available are becoming much more mature. So, for example, in terms of HR, you might have a platform such as Bamboo, which makes it easier for you to keep track of which jobs you're looking to recruit for, keep track of all the people who are applying for those jobs. So rather than everything coming into an HR mailbox and having to try and keep track of it by putting flags or categories on emails in particular mailboxes, you've then got a platform which allows you to model and then manage the whole workflow through. But again, with platforms like Bamboo, they can then post to different job seeker boards such as Indeed, again, to help finding those people as well. I think in terms of recruitment, the other thing that's really important is just to make sure that you've got the recruitment process properly set out in the first place. And one of the things that we found when we reviewed our recruitment process at the beginning of the year is that stage where you're looking for references is really crucial. And I think if you go on the kind of standard way that you're going to email the employer that that the candidate was working for before, and just ask them for reference, quite often they'll say, well, our policy is not to, or they give a very standard, we can just confirm when they started and left. But what we found is if we talk to the candidate and say, can you tell us other people that we can talk to, both people who've line managed you or colleagues or people that you've managed yourself, we end up having a much more real conversation. And it's a lot easier then to be able to then verify the work that they said that they were involved with and see whether the impact that they felt that they had was actually real or corroborated by the references. But in terms of how technology can make the need for less people to be involved in the business occurs is really by looking, it's those thousands of small improvements that you can make. It's the sum of aggregated benefits. If you can look across your company and see opportunities where things are slightly inefficient, you've got a process that requires someone to manually put information in. So for example, you may have a CRM and you may have a project tool that then manages the project. And every time you have a new project, you have to take all the information that was in the CRM and re-enter it manually. That takes a lot of time. If you can look at all your workflows through the different areas of your company, whether it's back office or project management or sales or marketing, and map out how it works at the moment, you can start to see where there are data gaps, where you're having to create manual bridges with people to have that information go across. Now, there's two problems with that. One is that it takes time and it's manual. The second thing is that then errors can get introduced. Or thirdly, people just don't bother doing it at all because it's too much of a hassle. And so you might think, well, actually, what's the big deal? That only takes me 10 minutes. But then if you think about, well, we're doing 20 new projects a month, that's 200 minutes. That's 3.5 hours of time that we're wasting with that particular person every single month or across the team. Or even just in terms of, whether because we do IT support as well, if things are not running properly, if the printer keeps jamming or people can't get onto the file sharing system or working from home is much slower, and say you've got a company of 50 people and each person is wasting an hour a week, that's 4 hours over 50, that's 200 hours. And if you're billing, at £50 an hour, 200 times 50, that's £10,000 a month that you're saying goodbye to, just in terms of inefficiencies.
I think with that, Rona, because I see this in companies, and even for my own companies, you see, right, it's only 10 minutes, and you go, well, it's only 10 minutes, and you just get on with it. And then you think, okay, let's get this sorted. And you think, right, I'm going to find a system that can do everything we're doing now. And I get bogged down by looking at all these demos, and then you go, well, actually, it does probably 70-80% of what I want. It's not quite good enough. And then I give up, and I'm sure other people do the same. And I think partly it's got to be, you've just got to get out of that habit of it's only another 10 minutes, because that escalates because it's 10 minutes every day or every project, whatever it is. What would be your tips to encourage someone just to get through that pain barrier of can't finding something that does 100% of what you want it to do? How do you either accept the 70%, 80% and just break through that? Because I think that's a challenge for me.
Yeah, well, they say perfection is the enemy of good. And if you're always trying to find the perfect solution, that's not going to work out very well. And it's about progress. It's not about perfection. It's about how do I get rid of those 10 minutes? Because otherwise, what you can end up doing is wasting time, jumping from system to system, or spending ages, implementing those systems. So the first thing is, you want to make sure that whatever you're putting in place is going to fit in with what you've already got. So what you don't want to do is end up causing more problems by suddenly signing up with a system and then finding it doesn't talk to anything else. And the whole thing you were trying to solve in the first place isn't being solved and actually made the problem worse. The other thing as well is that when you're introducing systems is you want to make sure that everyone's aware of this. Obviously, if it's something that's just for you, that's a different thing. But if it's something that's going to impact the whole company, you want to make sure you've talked to everyone, you understand the other problems that they're having, because although you may have one issue, there may be a few other issues that have to be resolved as well. So, involving all the stakeholders. The other thing as well is that when you're going to introduce something new, you want to have buy-in. You don't want people to feel they've been done to, but that they've actually been part of this process as well. But that's the thing is, if we think about where we are now in terms of technology and how far we've gone in the last 30 years, these things that the tools that we now have at our disposal are so powerful, because in the mid-80s we started having word processors and laser printers, and typesetting used to be something really laborious, and you can now you could then very easily put together reports and documents and presentations that you could never have done before. And if you think about now in terms of information technology, that at the moment it's completely feasible, if you're dealing with any kind of information, to find a place to house it and to manage it. And even if you're doing something as complex as databases, you've got the likes of Airtable or Notion or Coda. There are so many different products. So just in terms of that, if you found an issue and you're trying to resolve it, what you want to do first of all is think about what your needs are. Make sure you've gathered all the needs across the company. The second thing is look at the different tools you're already using to make sure that what you then choose is going to work with those well. The next thing is then, once you've got a short list, you can compare it back to your requirements and just make sure it fits. Now, the next thing after that is what you don't want to do. Let's say you've got 6 different products you think might solve the issue. If you now sign up with 6 different products, you're going to get 6 different email marketing funnels that you're going to be passed through with lots and lots of different emails, people pestering you to get on a demo call and everything else. So a really easy way of doing a shortcut to that is, once you've found a few, is to just go on YouTube. A lot of people these days, especially with the more popular products, will be doing their own demos and recording those. So you can get a feel for what it looks like, what the interface is like, before doing that. Then you'll probably get down to a couple. You can then try those out as a demo. And I'd also encourage you very much to do a proof of concept first of all. Get a few people involved, get them onto the system. Maybe if you've got a few different departments, have one from each department represented at least. And then once you've done the POC across the different products that are in your shortlist, you can then again go back to your original requirements, see what it needs to integrate with. And also, depending on the size of the company, you may be looking at SAP or Salesforce, you may be looking at something else like Nutshell CRM or Pipedrive. You should be aiming to work with a product that is in line with the size of your company. If you're a small or a micro or a medium size or a large business, these products have their ideal customer for lots of reasons, because the total cost of ownership of a large system could run into hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds a year. It might require you to have a dedicated team of people running it all the time. So you need to make sure that you don't then bite off more than you can chew.
So with these systems, then, what's your favorite kind of not necessarily must have, but yeah, what have you found for your own business or companies you work closely with? What have been the no-brainer systems or bits of software they're using that have really added value to them?
Yeah, so and this is one of the nice things about companies, is that they may be doing different things and providing different services, or developing and manufacturing and selling different products, but behind the scenes they all, in terms of the overheads and the back office, they all doing the same things. So you are raising quotes, you're doing invoices, you're collecting payments, you're doing credit control, you're dealing with HR, you're dealing with legal issues, master service agreements, all that kind of stuff. And so there are some really neat products. So, on the accounting side, I would assume that everyone, and this is not the case actually, will have some kind of online banking tool, whether it's Sage or QuickBooks or FreshBooks or Xero. So that's, really low hanging fruit. And just as an example, we know someone who does car valeting, and he's still generating his invoices, and there are still quite a lot of, micro businesses that generate their invoices manually, and then they hand it all over to the accountant, who will then enter it probably into Xero or whatever. That's the first thing. In terms of people, having an HR system as well is really beneficial. If nothing else, it will manage that massive headache of keeping track of everyone's holidays. If you don't have something in place, you're going to get that, how many holidays have I got left? Is it 3? Is it 4? Who's off today? And with an HR system, that's all managed automatically. Not only that, you can then subscribe in Microsoft Outlook or Google or whatever you're using to the holiday calendar. So you can see who's off and who isn't. If you're using Teams or Slack, you can then have an alert that posts every morning to say these people are off today. It's really easy to see that kind of stuff. So in terms of HR, and then also in terms of communication, I would assume that most people now are familiar with at least products such as Slack or Teams. And if they have been using it, what they'll see is that internal emails have dropped to pretty much nothing. It's much more efficient to work in that kind of way. Some people I know are still using WhatsApp. I know that MPs use WhatsApp.
It's interesting, isn't it, with talking about communication and email, because I think we waste so much time with emails and have done. Having some of these other tools are great, but sometimes it's which one do you use for which environment. And I think I've seen companies really set a good kind of standard as to this is how we like to do things, and it works the best. But yeah,
and that's really important with those kind of things. You have to outline how you're intending it to be used, and also if there are people who are wedded to their email, to keep giving them a nudge to ensure that they're now using the right tools. And that's another thing about introducing technology is, what are you intending it to do? What value do you think it's going to bring? And to be able to then show that value. So you need to measure it. So again, after you've introduced a product or a service and you've initially thought about the needs, it's important to then go back and also think about when you are going to get that return on investment. Is it going to be a year? Is it going to be 2 years? It's going to be 3 months. And often if you've picked the right tool, you'll actually find that it gives you much more of a benefit than you thought it would. And so one of the things that, and this is a tool that I really like. One of the things that we were struggling with for quite a while was finding a decent project management tool. And we went through quite a few, some quite obscure, some quite technical. So there's the likes of Monday.com, Basecamp, Rike, Asana. You may have heard of some of these tools. And as important as the feature set is also the personality of the tool. Each software is made by a different group of people, and they have a different kind of user set in mind. And we went through all these different tools, and they just weren't quite right. The adoption wasn't quite right. People felt that sometimes they're too technical, or they just didn't get along with it. So over the last few years, we've actually gone through several project management tools. And again, because of what we do, we're more happy to change what we're using on a more regular basis. And I wouldn't recommend normally that you keep changing your tools, but We just hadn't found the right one. So we then came across a tool called ClickUp, and it's a task management tool in folders and lists. So, but what's great about these tasks is they can represent anything. They don't actually have to be a task, but it's a hierarchy. And on these tasks, you can make comments, you can assign it to people, set due dates. And we've been able to use this in many different areas to track and handle many different tasks and also other bits of information. So we're currently going through our ISO 27001 certification. As part of that, we needed to have a central database of all our non-disclosure agreements. And it's quite easy when you sign something to just stick it in a folder. We had a folder of these anyway, but it's then harder to know things like who did we sign it with, what were the terms of the NDA, where's the original file. So we used ClickUp as a database to do that as well. So what we found is we've been able to remove Airtable as well. So we don't have that database, we've moved that in. And also because it's so easy to use, we've had adoption across the whole company. It's not just been like, well, this is more of a technical thing and I'm not technical, therefore I'm not.
I guess with that, Roman, it's all about defining the needs and then realizing actually you can do more and more with that system. And I think that's where a lot of people, I think, can miss out and end up with multiple different things. You think actually you can use them for different things.
And I think that's, yeah.
I'm keen just to, well, there's two things I wanted to cover, and we're actually going to run out of time for this. So the two things I'm quite keen to cover, I think a lot of companies, we're talking about data. You mentioned a couple of tools for dealing with databases. Lots of data. We've all got data. We've got tons of data. But I think a lot of people struggle with what to actually do with that data or how to simplify the outputs of that data that's going to help them make decisions. That's a massive topic. But if anyone's struggling with thinking, we've got all this data, what do we do with it? Any top tips as to making some small kind of steps forward to kind of use data better for helping with the business?
Well, so there's a few things. So in terms of data, if you say data, one of the things I think about is files. So one thing is to have a decent file sharing platform, and one of the best in the business is a product called Ignite. And one of the great things about Ignite as well is that it basically has compliance by checkbox. I know normally when you talk about a checkbox ticking exercise, it's about not really doing it, but in this case, in terms of GDPR or HIPAA or whatever SOC compliance you might need, they have a product called Ignite Protect. You can put it into your system, and even if you're not using Ignite for file sharing, whether you're using Dropbox or Google Drive or Box or anything else, it can give you a really good idea of where this data is, who it's being shared with as well, and where you might be breaking compliance. So it can very easily tell you where personal information is being stored or where people are putting credit cards or other stuff like that. So if you've got PCI compliance with credit card processing, you can go, oh, whoops, we're actually storing some credit cards here. Let's see. So that's and the other thing about data is actually, in terms of KPIs. So in terms of performance, whether it be accounting, turnover, gross profit, all that kind of stuff, or in terms of how many leads we've been dealing with, how many of those closed in terms of sales or in terms of marketing, how many new visits we're getting to the website, how many of those are converting, which campaigns are working better. So there's this model called OKR, which is objectives and key results. And the idea is at a top level for your company, you set maybe 3 to 5 objectives. You have 3 to 5 underlying key results, which can measure how well you're doing against those objectives. And then, so one of the things to think about is each department, what are their key metrics? What shows whether they're doing well or not? How are these then aligned to showing whether they're progressing on the objectives of the company? And if each of the different department heads thinks about a number which then summarizes how well they're doing, what you can then do is you can take those numbers and then summarize them up into one number, which can then show how well your whole company is performing. And there are various different tools which you can then use to do this. So there's the likes of Tableau or Power BI or Bright Gauge. But I think that's one thing that's really helped us is to look at what are the metrics across our departments.
So remind me, OKRs, what does that stand for?
So those are objectives and key results. And that came out of work that was done by Intel in the 70s. And it's one of the reasons why the likes of Google have succeeded so well. And there's a book about it called Measure What Matters.
I was thinking of that as a book I should have read, actually. I think I've started it. Yeah, so I should have remembered what that meant. But yeah,
so there's lots of different types of data, but I mean, just in the same thing, and I think some people might find it a bit onerous, but it's really important to make sure that you've done your GDPR work, you know, where your data is, how long you store it for, what the legal basis is, who's processing it. And then if you're dealing with other people's data, to make sure you've got a data processing agreement between yourselves and the other parties that are using that data.
No, great, Rowan. I think that's great. Some great advice there. And Ignite, I'm actually using for one of my bits of business, and I probably need to know more about it because it sounds actually it probably does more than I knew about it. But I think the OKRs. I think as a leader of business, anyone listening to this as a leader of business, I think OKRs, and even without reading the book, simplifying the important things for themselves as the leader, for everyone that's running part of the business, and all individuals in the business is super important. And I think using extracts of data to report these things really important, and you know it can be done in so many simple ways, but you've got to know what you're aiming for, and I think that book's really important.
I think just mainly, I mean, you know, just in summary, the important thing is to notice what's wrong, figure out what you're trying to do, and then put something in place, and not worry about trying to solve everything at once. You know, progress is progress. As long as you're continuing making some kind of progress, you're going to start feeling the benefits. And it may take a while, but once you've started doing things in a lot of different areas, the aggregation of those small changes will really start to pile up.
Sure. No, there's great points, Rowan. Thank you. Rowan, we've literally got probably 30 seconds left of this. What is, in your view, the excitement about Metaverse? Can you summarize very briefly? How excited are you about Metaverse and what's going on there?
I think it's, yes. I think it is very exciting. And what it means is that we can build more. It's really hard to say. So trying to not summarize too slowly, but there's a book called Sapiens. It talks about the evolution of humanity. And one of the things that allowed us to step away from the rest of the animal kingdom is to create ideas that were not based in reality, but then believe that they were real. One example of this, for example, is money. So this is taking it to a much larger step, where not only are we just dealing with ideas that we believe are real that aren't really real, is that we can now start interacting with these things and living in an environment where we're working with these things. So I'm not quite sure where it's going to head, but I do feel that it's going to be potentially, if we look back in the next hundreds of years, a real kind of change in humanity. But
do you think
very early days.
Do you think people in SMEs, companies should be thinking about it or interested in that, or do we need?
I think initially the kind of things that will allow you to do, and I think one of the things that we found difficult with remote working is that working with a Zoom call, for example, it's not the same as being there in person. There are a lot of cues that you miss that you don't get with being apart. And I think having a virtual reality space where people can, even when they're at home, be sitting at a virtual desk in an office, it means that someone else can be passing by them. They can have those kind of ad hoc interactions and meetings and chats that you can't really kind of orchestrate at the moment with the likes of Zoom. So I think in the first instance, it's going to be that kind of interaction.
It sounds interesting and it sounds exciting, but also quite scary
it's very new. Very new.
Yeah. Rowan, I've really enjoyed talking today, so thank you for the time, and hopefully we've given some thoughts for people listening this to take away. But we might have to come back and revisit Metaverse when we know a bit more and it's developed further. But thanks, Rowan.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.